what I will be talking about today is the relationship, I would say, between ethics, professionalism, and evaluation. And as you see from this title, saying from doing no harm to preventing bad and to doing good means moving away from a traditional mainstream, I would say, way of thinking about ethics in evaluation and thinking about what the current landscape of the world of our evaluators find themselves in this new world. What are the new tasks, in a sense, and the need for considering a larger sphere of evaluation than it is the one that is supposed in this idea of doing no harm. Okay, so this is the outline of what I will be talking about. So, first of all, the place of ethics in evaluation and the kind of professionalism that is evaluation and how ethics refers, how it impacts on evaluation. And then problems, guidelines, and ethical principle, because this idea of guidelines, all what I will be talking about comes from the reflection on how the evaluation guidelines of many associations, institutions, etc. have changed recently and have introduced these new ideas of preventing bad and doing good. So the reference to guidelines is really important because it gives you an idea of what is going on in the field of evaluation research and evaluation institution, etc. And then I will enter into the difference between these different principles. And in the last part, I will talk about evaluation approaches and attitude to values. Why? Because when we talk about evaluation, of course, we talk about different ways of doing evaluation, of thinking about evaluation. So even if this landscape has changed, including preventing bad and doing good, not all evaluators are not having their own approaches understand it in the same way. So, let's start by the beginning. First of all, I think the first idea that came is that many people thought at the beginning, why talking about ethics in evaluation? What has it to do with evaluation? What has ethics to do with evaluation? It seemed an odd topic, and it isn't. And I think that, and I will refer to this idea frequently, I think that some of the ideas that are prevalent at the moment about complexity, about new problems, about ethics, is something that was already there, had already been there for a long time. There are problems, issues that now are stronger, more urgent, but have always been there. And from this point of view, even this sensibility, this attitude to ethics was present, at least in a certain group of evaluators whom I have always thought as my pantheon, people whom I had always referred to. I think to Carol Weiss, to Robert Stake, to Michael Patton, who by the way is one of the authors of the book I will be talking about. Eleanor Chelimsky, who has always insisted on this idea of public good or working for the general interest. Jennifer Green, I think she's someone who has been here many times and you know all very well. And I have also my personal pantheon of authors who have been working in development economics and through that in evaluating development projects, development policies, such as Albert Hirschman and his younger collaborator Judith Tendler, whom I have been working with. And I have recently written something about Hirschman and Tendler as forerunners of some way of looking at evaluation as we do now, which is very much imbued with this idea of morality. So I think this is a topic that I was familiar with, which I liked. I have been interested for a long time. But early evaluators' guidelines had little interest in ethics. And ethics was simply a matter of doing no harm to your evaluee, and especially referred to the idea of avoid conflict of interest. But there was not an idea that an evaluator, when he or she were evaluated, had to think about the general welfare in general and problems that referred to public good that went beyond the relationship between the evaluator and the evaluee. But recent evaluation guidelines, and I refer particularly to that of the United Nations, DFID, IDEAS, and other, have introduced new items. And so when they list what are the requisite, the problems, the issues that evaluators have to deal with in their ethical codes, they start thinking about something more, a larger idea of taking, first of all, of dealing with values and conflicting values, and that's the word. Values and interests of different stakeholders, how to take them into account, and refer to something which is larger than just doing no harm, and so thinking about what could be improved, how the situation can change or even can be worse than expected, and what we should do about that, and in any case, how we should consider that. Whatever I tell you comes from an experience I had in writing this book. Some of you here know about the group of Interval. That is a group of concerned people who get together with some projects about some topics, some ideas, and the same way of being together and starting thinking about something puts in motion a process of learning. So we started with this idea, and then we asked people to join, and we decided that this idea could be tackled from different points of view. And so the result is this book, which has chapters of different kinds, some more practical, that is to say, examples of situations where an evaluator had to choose something to decide what to do from an ethical point of view, and other chapters that are more theoretical and more refer to the literature in general on evaluation. But the process of doing this book was really interesting because we compare different approaches, different ways of looking at that. So I think it's, for me, it's the first time I talk in public. This book has just been edited, and I would like to share with you some of the ideas that are contained in this book, because I think they are worth reflecting on. So, why ethics? And what ethics? Because I think when we say ethics, what do we mean? I refer to this. Let me read this long quote by Thomas Schwand, who is someone also I think most of you know, who has written a lot about this idea of professionalism, democratic professionalism, and democratic ethic in profession. And he says, the field of evaluation needs to debate, define, and embrace an explicit understanding of a professional ethics that takes into account the range of clients and stakeholders encountered, the variety of evaluation practice, and the severity of contemporary challenges to evaluation practice. So in this quote you have all what I want to talk about. So, first of all, the contemporary challenges. We think about these things from the point of view of today, not of when we all started to do something in evaluation. And there are different ways of doing evaluation, variety of evaluation practices, of course, but there are different ranges of clients and stakeholders who have conflicting values, who think of their own, who are located in different environments. So there is this problem of diversity that has to be taken account. But if this is something that evaluators should think about now, what does it mean? This doesn't mean to say that what evaluators have to say what is good or what is bad, what is right or what is wrong. This is not our task. We are not ethicists. We are people engaged in a process of evaluating what is going on, and so helping people to make their own judgment, to establish what they think it's a good practice and what is bad. So even in guidelines, there are no strict rules that we are looking for, but a guidance of how to behave in a situation of conflict or ambiguity. So the idea is that we are in a situation where we have to take decision, where have to help people take decision, and it is not clear what should be done, which is not necessarily contained in the program, but has to be decided on the spot, because all this problem of ambiguities and conflict come out when you are implementing something and evaluating something, and then it is on that moment that you have to be able to decide what is good and what is better and how to continue, and the evaluator has certain tasks. So this gives us the need to think about what kind of profession is that of the evaluator. And now here I want to refer to what I think is an opposition between two different ways of thinking of the evaluator as a professional and what are the consequences from the problem of ethics. So if we think in terms of evaluator, the traditional way of thinking of a profession, and when we ask about is evaluation a profession, we also think in these terms mostly, is you have to be an expert, you have to know about the policy, you have to know about the technique, and but the fact is that all these ideas of competence and all this list of what are the competences of evaluators are also based on the assumption that you are in a situation where there is a simple and linear program. Things should go from here to there. You have to find out whether they really went from here to there. And you have to look for a certain regularity. You want to be sure that every time you do A, B will follow. So this idea of a professional as an expert is based on this assumption, traditional in the social sciences, in the so-called scientific method, that you want to see, you want to find out what can be repeated regularly and what you can say from a situation to the next, how to scale up, etc. In this idea, you are trained for technique, for knowing what are the best methods for doing something, and the ethics principles are that you should be impartial, neutral, and value neutral. And let's stop for a moment of this idea of neutrality. What does neutrality mean? You know, it's a typical Weberian assumption that research is value-free because you shouldn't be too much engaged with the topic you are talking about. But in fact, being value neutral means that you do not take into consideration all the values of the people who are involved in an evaluation, because you assume that the values are those of who planned the program. So they wanted something, that is the value that you are simply considering, and then at that point you are neutral because you don't take into consideration any other value. Well, I think that this which is, of course, a kind of caricature, because everybody knows that things are much more complex than that, and nobody would take this face value. But there is another idea of a professional, which I've always been very much interested in, and reading it recently, I was really shocked by this idea. And this is Donald Schoen's idea of a reflective practitioner. According to Schoen, the practitioner are people who reflect in action. They do not simply apply something that the science says, but whatever they are doing, they think, am I doing the right thing? What should I do in this situation? And the assumption here is that you do that because whatever you do, you find yourself in a situation of, listen to this word, complexity, uncertainty, uniqueness, and value conflicts. So most of us who read the literature now say, oh, now we are in a turbulent time and we are taken in by complexity, uncertainty, we don't know what to do, etc. But this was written in 1983. And this is what has always happened. Now we are in a different situation from the point of complexity. There are new issues, no problems. But the idea that you always find yourself in a situation of complexity and uncertainty, and of uniqueness. Uniqueness is very important. Uniqueness is not just that you is linked to subjectivity. Uniqueness as that anything you do is embedded in a certain kind of elements that constellation of circumstances is unique. The same thing can be happen in another environment and can be connected in a different way. But each situation you find yourself in is unique. So this idea, if you think in this way, what should the professional do? According to Schoen, should be trained for reflection in action. So reflection in action is a kind of way of doing, which has to do with methodologies of research, but ways of thinking and an attitude. And he opposes to technical rationality of the traditional idea of expert that of artistry. And you always know that we always say, is this science of art? So it's a very general opposition. But artistry means the ability to deal with, according to Schoen, the ability to deal with the situation of complexity. So the ability of forge for yourself what you should do in a certain situation. And from this point, ethics is different, because it implies to be able to provide an autonomous judgment from an autonomous point of view, concerned, you are interested in what the people say, what they do, how they solve their problems, and value critical. So, if you look at this from the point of view of the competence, I think that the difference resides very much on this opposition between what kind of knowledge is required. From a traditional point of view, now it has been evolved, and there is this idea of the theory of change. Theory of change means that this is what you think, why should happen in a certain way, they should change in a certain way because you do this and that. And then the approach, what the evaluator does is to verify whether this held or if things change in a different way. But from the point of view of the reflective practitioner, there is this idea of the single loop and double loop theories. Single loop theories are the theories the theory of change that is at the beginning embedded inside the program. But when you realize that things happen in a different way than expected, then you have to start thinking and put to work all these artists, etc., to find out a second loop, that is to say, something which is improved. It's a theory that takes account of all the difficulties you find yourself in, but also of the ways of solving them. And so, from the point of expertise, it is not only a problem of using the correct method, but also with this idea of being open to surprise, to understand that there are things that you did not expect, and you want to be able to master them. So I think that keeping in mind these two ways of thinking about profession and about how an evaluator can be a professional, we can enter into this idea of professionalism and ethics. Now, I still refer to that article by Schwant, who has introduced this idea of professionalism and ethics. He says that a profession, by definition, has always an ethical commitment. A doctor, teacher, engineers, they all have to think about ethics. But there are different types of professionalism. And he lists 3 types of professionalism. Social trusteeship, which is when someone works for the public. Technocratic professionalism, when someone works for a client, private or public, and democratic professionalism, when someone works with the public. So working with the public means to be value critical, value committed, concerning with preventing bad and good, whereas in the idea of technocratic professionalism, you are more concerned with value neutrality, and ethics also enters into this field. I have simply put this on a map. I will not stay longer on this because otherwise it will not be possible to go on. So here is simply a simplification of type of professionalism, type of relationship to the public, and ethical principle that is called into question. So what are the social problems we are looking at now, and what do the evaluation guidelines tell us? First of all, we have to think in terms what is the situation, what is the role of the evaluators, and what kind of guidelines we need. So first of all, the world in the 20s is, as you know, climate crisis, war, increasing disparities. There are a lot of uncertainty, ambiguity, and value conflicts around, and whatever we do has to take into consideration this. So what should an evaluator do? And should he or she move from the role of the expert to that of the coach? The word coach is also a kind of language proper to shown. Coach is someone who is working with the various stakeholders to make them become expert themselves. So you want also the people you are doing evaluation with to become expert, to become those who provide judgment and inputs for the evaluation. And so the new evaluation guidelines, the ones I was referring to, take into consideration all these items of novelty. And in particular, they put greater attention to the context, to values and interest, and to these new ethical principles. In the book, there is a chapter by Robert de Berg, who is a long examination of the different guidelines that have been issued recently in the years 2010. And he has listed them and categorized them into main problems and issues, or items. I will say something later. And from this point, he realizes that there are those type of items that become more frequent and are better tackled with than before. And so what we have done in the book is to look at what all these new things could mean. So the book is from the starting point of considering that these guidelines have changed and they've put new issues and how we can deal with them. And so we arrived at this, which is the frame within which the authors of the book have been working. And I will try to explain this in more detail, but let me first of all say what it means. So the idea is that there is a larger area for ethics, which is not only ethics for the evaluator, but ethics for the evaluations. So the 3 principles of tackling bad, doing no harm, and doing good have a meaning from the point of view of the evaluator. What should the evaluator do in his own relationship with the evaluee, with the other stakeholders, but the problem of his own attitude to the people who are inside the situation. But there is a larger area. What is this evaluation doing in the situation where it is? What does it impact? How does it impact into the situation where the program is done, where the evaluation is being done? And so this is different. It is not simply what should the evaluator do in his relationship with someone, but what is his or her own responsibility toward the environment, toward the society, toward the larger area of ethics. And so we will now, I will try to enter into the various aspects. But speaking of ethics for evaluators means what are the ethical values concerning the professional conduct of the evaluator. So what it means to be, these are quotes from the chapter, what it means to be a democratic professional who is concerned with the public good. So not simply with the person vis-à-vis is going, but with the society in general, with the public good. And ethics for evaluation is ethical values relevant for determining the acceptability and optimality of objectives and strategies. So entering much more into what is about, and not simply saying, well, this is what they wanted with this program, but did they, when it was planned, were these principles taken into consideration, and what should we do about that? And so what it means to act when alternatives are open to the various stakeholders, decision makers, commissioners, implementers, etc. So you see, the idea is that you find yourself in a situation where you have to choose, to decide, to do something, and not simply to do what is expected to you if you are a good, correct evaluator. So let's enter into the various aspects. Doing no harm. The first idea of the evaluator, he has to identify an intended impact on the evaluee. So there are all these problems of privacy, being tactful in asking questions, no exposure of wrongdoing, avoiding conflict of interest. So good behavior of the evaluator vis-à-vis the evaluee. But there is also a larger idea, and this is the idea of considering collateral damage. Now we very often now we say that when we plan an evaluation, when we plan a program, and then when we plan an evaluation, we should not only look at the objectives, at the goals of that program, but at something else, what will happen in the larger area. But generally it is based on this idea of avoiding a risk, evaluating a risk. And what is a risk? A risk is a bad opportunity that you can think of in advance. So a risk is something that you take, but if you take a risk, means that you know that something may happen, and you decide whether doing it or not. So this is always linked to this idea of doing no harm from the point of view of the individual, and doing no harm from the point of view of the society and of the larger environment, because you know that it might happen something, but you forecast it. So this idea that we should not simply look at what are the goals, how to measure them, etc., but also at something that might happen. There is an idea that in fact we can already forecast what might happen. And this is the idea of taking a risk and avoiding a risk, which is important because it's something that is crucial. And you should avoid, if you know that something could happen wrong, you would plan it in a different way. So from this point of view, it is still inside this philosophy of doing no harm, but it is also something that you can do in advance. So you could have enlarged you could have thought in terms of the larger area of evaluation, even inside the conception of doing no harm. But when you come to preventing bad, here things change, because From the point of view, and here there are a few chapters, one by Shekhar Singh, who is an Indian, and another by two other, by Inga Aronsson and Uras Nain, who have been working in development programs, development projects, mainly big projects, dams, etc. And they are full of examples of how you find yourself in a situation to prevent bad. But the main idea which is behind this, and which has been put forward by people who work in this field of environment, is that in many programs you already work with the idea of planned suffering. It is not the risk you take. You already know that things will go wrong for certain people. So what to do? So this is something that you can prevent if you feel that you have to do this. You can find yourself in a situation where there is already something which has been planned. And so what to do? Do you accept it because this is the program, or you try to do your best for avoiding this and preventing this? And the examples that are brought here are very interesting. The first one, on the personal integrity in situation where the evaluation would be influenced by vested interest, there is an example in a chapter by Shekhar Singh. There was a problem on a dam, and there were, of course, vested interest in doing that dam, whereas many ex ante assessment had established that would have created a lot of problems, but the policymakers went on, and the evaluator himself decided to go out to the public and to denounce this, so which was considered unethical from the point of view of the vested interest and the fact that you should not betray the contract that you have with your commissioner, but he thought he should have done it. So in a sense he breached the assumption of confidentiality because he thought it was in the public interest to do that. But from a larger idea of evaluation, there are this example, this is very interesting, by Aronson and Asnain, who talk about all the projects that refer to dams or to large replacement of people who are moved from one area to the other. And they find that the resettlement and the programs have this safeguard that say that this project should improve or at least restore the livelihoods and the living standards of the people who are replaced. And they say that this, at least restore, is really awful, because at least restore means that the project of development that goes against the interest of those who are displaced. So for them, there is not only no development, there is a situation, continues a situation of bad feeling, of being in a bad situation. So they have fought, these evaluators who have been confronted with this situation have tried to to denounce this safeguard and to say that it should imply that it improve. So eliminate, at least restore, and do whatever you can do to improve the situation, because you improve the situation of the general society, because you provide the water and what else, but you should not reduce the well-being of those people who are displaced. So, but in this case, it's a planned suffering, so they already knew that it was to have been done in this way. Or another example by Singh, there was a project of creating a road in a forest, and that forest was inhabited by indigenous tribal groups. They were very much affected by the presence of these people, and so the evaluators were able to reduce the damage that would have been done to this indigenous group by creating some different rules for how the road could have been utilized, etc. So even from this point of view, the evaluators considered the situation at large where the program would have created damage to be reduced. Here, I think that the concept that we are thinking about is no more that of risk, but it is this idea of unintended consequence, adverse unintended consequence. I want to come on this because this idea of unintended consequences, which is an old concept traditional in the social sciences, originally it was a concept of an idea of something good. There was change, there was something, a serendipitous idea, something that was not expected, but that would create a good change. But nowadays, it is mostly utilized in the opposite way. It is unintended, and it is unintended as negative. And these are situations in which it is unintended and negative. But when you think of doing good, and I'm going to do this, what is important, I think, is to utilize this idea of unintended consequences in a positive way. Because what it means to be good, to do good, of course, from the point of view of the relationship of the evaluator with the evaluee, doing good means to treat stakeholders with respect and dignity, to have an attitude of trying to enhance their possibilities, to empower them. So it's a situation of great positive empathy between the evaluator and the evaluee and the other stakeholders. But from the point of view of the evaluation, how could the evaluation benefit society and the target population? I think here the problem, the issue at stake is that of discovering and supporting positive and innovative solutions to serious problems. And I am strongly in sympathy with this idea, because I am very much thinking that when we evaluate something, we should not be obsessed by the fact that programs don't work and there is always failure. There are also programs, there are also situations that are good, that succeed, maybe in a different way than we expected. And if they succeed in a different way than we expected, means that there are positive unintended consequences, and we should go and look for these unintended consequences, because it is not simply, and I want to come back to that, it's not simply of avoiding a risk or taking into consideration a risk of what could negative be done, but being open to the positive surprise. And I come back to Sean's idea that the methodology of the research, of the reflection in action, is an idea of starting from a surprise. I realized that this problem could be solved. We had done a lot of work, we have thought of all the possible incentives and tools that could be done, but people in the area have been able to solve a problem, to find new solution, and we should stress that this happened and work on that. Why did this happen? What is the lesson that we can take from that? Of course, not having then the illusion that it can be scaled up, reproduced everywhere, because whatever good and new we find should be then adapted to other situations, etc. But looking for positive unintended consequences, I think, is one of the main and most interesting tasks of an evaluator from this point of view. And from an ethical point of view, it's really important because it shows that we trust the people and we are interested in what they are saying, in what are their values and how they can use their values. So from this point of view, I think that tackling bad, doing good, and doing no harm reflect these more general research principles of risk and unintended consequences. Now, my last point, and then I think I've talked too much, is how do the evaluation approaches that we know take into consideration all these ideas about ethics? And there are a few chapters, and particularly one by Barnett and Digger and one by Michael Patton, who are referred to this idea of what kind of approaches. And both have this idea, very similar. Barnett and Dicker talk of from assessing impact to achieving impact. So this more concerned way in which the evaluator works with the situation. And Patton talks about a different from an external observer of change to an internal participant. So if the role of evaluators in this, both people think in terms of changes that have taken place inside the way of thinking to evaluation. And if we have these ideas, if you think in these terms, we realize that from the point of view of values, there are three possible ways. One is to be value-free, which is the external evaluator, the model of the traditional I was telling you before. And then you can be value-critical or value-committed, and this is what these people imply. And value-critical means that you are a learning partner. The evaluator is a learning partner, and debates and helps the people who are inside to develop their own ideas and to formalize what are their values. Whereas you can be value committed, you can be more inside, more on the side of the evaluee. And here also I have a map where I have tried to put all these differences on a map. And in the left column, you see that values and interest, independence, context, and consideration for rights and wrongdoings are items that are present in the evaluation guidelines that Vandenberg has analyzed. And there would have been other, but we have taken this because these are the ones on which our collaborators have commented, and where the difference between these different evaluation approaches can be identified. You can be value-free. If you are value-free, values are a potential bias in evaluation. You don't want values to impact on the situation because you don't want to be influenced by the values of someone that is not the planner of the program. Whereas if you are value critical, you think of the values of all the stakeholders, and they should be recognized and taken into consideration, and you should help to make them dialogue. So you are critical with the values of the people who are involved, not necessarily taking part for one or another, so you are still independent, but you are taking consideration that there is more than just one value. But you may also be value committed, and you think that you should in fact support the values of the marginalized groups that should receive special attention. And there is one paper there who shares this view, and it is that by Donna Mertens. On independence, the value-free approach says that independence is obtained through protocols to ward off undue influence. So there is also an idea that guidelines are really strict protocols for doing what to do in a certain situation. Whereas in a value critical, it is a substantial independence to ask the right questions, to use the correct methodology. So there is an idea that you are more active in a sense, because you want to make all the people learn, heard, but you still are, you still want the different values to emerge and to confront each other. And in the value committee, this skin in the game is an expression by Michael Patton. Means that you feel yourself inside. It's something that happens to you as an evaluator, much more than being critical of what is going on. Then the question of the context. In previous guidelines, context in a kind of a traditional way of thinking and is something that is a threat to validity. So the context should not impact. Whereas we know that the context is absolutely taking into consideration the context where you are working is a way to understand the intervention in the web of development and conflict. So, and in each evaluation takes place where conflict exists, but according to the context. So the context is really part of the evaluation. Whereas in value committed, there is a kind of identification between context and culture. I must say that I am a bit perplexed about this, because of course I feel a strong feeling for the marginalized groups, etc. But I think that this literature is too much linked to the idea of indigenous evaluation. So all the examples that are brought are examples by indigenous people in New Zealand, etc. And I think that context and culture, of course, context contains culture, but it is not to be identified with the culture of from an anthropological view of the indigenous people. In any case, context is what are the ideas, the institution, the situation, the timing, whatever a program and evaluation is there, and you work into this. And consideration for rights and wrongdoing for the value free, they should be brought to the proper authorities. If there is something wrong, that you should go to and say and denounce it, but not do anything. In the value critically, we are more concerned with that, and you refer to the wrongdoings of all the stakeholders and you try to make them do something. And in the value committed, you are particularly concerned with the marginalized group, but always trying to do something for them. So from this point of view, as you can see, our thinking about evaluation spans in different ways of dealing with these problems. So there are problems of changes from a situation at the origin of our thinking about evaluation to today, and I think it is this substitution from the old principle to the new ones, and this is time going on. But there is also an horizontal difference between approaches, which has always existed, I must say, although maybe the value committed is more recent. And so the opposition between different ways of looking at this comes back from at least when there was all this thinking about how a professional role could be described in different ways. And I think, and this is my last word, we owe a lot to our classics, and we think that we have new ideas, but of course we are very respectful and thankful to people like Weiss, like Chelimsky, like Stake, like those who since the beginning said that we should look at complex and uncertain situations and take into consideration the value of the general value of the people and all those who are concerned with the situation. Thank you.